Welcome to the Emerging Civil War Podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me from the banks of the mighty Mississippi at Vicksburg National Military Park is Taylor Hegler. Taylor, how are you today?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing great today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being with us. Taylor is a park ranger at Vicksburg, and she handles a lot of the education programs there and coordinates volunteers, which is a fancy term for herding cats, as I understand in a lot of ways. At least other volunteer coordinators I know.
Feels like that sometimes.
And that's not to disparage volunteers at all. It'd be
No.
wonderful. So it's Women's History Month in March, and I always like to talk to women who work in the Civil War public history field to just talk a little bit about your careers and hold you up as an example. Because, my experience with you, Taylor, is you do some wonderful work out there at Vicksburg, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it today.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited.
So what are some of the things that you do as part of your job at Vicksburg?
I think an easier question would be, what do I not do, Chris? As you know, all of us park rangers around here, we say we wear a lot of hats. It's not just the flat hat. So a lot of what I do revolves around my collateral duties, which are the education and youth programming and the volunteer program management. So I put together curriculum-based education programming for schools to use. That includes distance learning programs, virtual programs, and in-person programming. I also lead up our summertime youth programs, which would be our Junior Ranger Days summer camp that we have every year. Very, very popular. Lots of hard work, but completely worth it when you see the looks on the kids' faces. And when you get out into the community and they remember you, they're like, Ranger Taylor, Ranger Taylor. It feels really good to know that somebody remembers you and they remember it in a positive way. And then I do a lot with obviously the volunteer program, all of our major service events, and managing all of our recurring volunteer positions as well.
And when you talk about going out into the community and the kids connect with you and you remember, that's got to be, I would imagine, one of the most rewarding parts about the job.
Oh my gosh, Chris, you should see the smile on my face. We actually just did the Mardi Gras parade here in Vicksburg. We hadn't done it before. And we're walking and we're throwing out beads and you've got people screaming and all of a sudden I just start hearing from everywhere, like, Ranger Taylor. I hear kids screaming my names or my name. And I look over and it's all these kids that were in my Junior Ranger programs. Some of them were teens that I had just spoken to about a great leadership program we've started up here. And to know that you've made that positive impact on their life and that they remember you in a good light, and they like that they can show their friends that they know you.
You're a celebrity, you're a famous person.
That makes me happy, especially because I feel very caught somewhere in between like young and cool and old and a mom. So I still got it a little bit, I guess.
Well, and you mentioned, I know that you have a couple kids and, you're still cool mom. At some point, you'll stop being cool mom, as all
not a regular mom, cool mom. Yeah. Yes.
But it seems to me, and that's one reason why I love to talk to people about what they're doing is, they might not, these students might not remember that this brigade was positioned at this part on the line, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And to me, I think that is such an important part of kindling their interest in history.
Absolutely. And that's why I really got into this field. I knew for a very long time growing up that I wanted to be that spark for kids that I had when I was a young girl. And that's how I knew I wanted to be involved in some way with youth programming, education programming. At first, I thought I wanted to be a history teacher. But then I realized, like, props to teachers, I do not have the patience to be with them for several hours a day, 5 days a week. So the teachers are really some amazing and very special people. But I knew that I still wanted to do something with kids, and the museum field was something that I had been working in as a tour guide for a while. And I was like, I think it has everything that I really want, this public history field where I can do history because I love history and I can be in these amazing historic spaces, and but also connect with children who really are our future. I know that sounds so cliche, but one of my taglines here is that the youth of today are the stewards of tomorrow. And unless we make it a point to connect with them and make an impact on their lives, that interest in history and interest in your public lands, it's going to die out generationally. So it's really up to us to make it important to them.
That's a wonderful idea. The children of today are our stewards of tomorrow. I really like the way you articulate that. You might say it's as cliche sounding that the kids are the future, but I don't go to a round table anywhere in the country where they're not saying, how do we get more young people involved?
Yes.
So what do you do to like help them get excited when they're out on the field or at a program with you?
I act ridiculous. So I found that a lot of the silly, ridiculous things I do in the moment, the kids think that I'm weird. But then I find out later they went home and they told their parents all about how cool it was and how much fun they had. But to get them excited, we do a lot of dancing in my programs because I'm big into physical activity while they're here. And we dance to Huey Lewis and the News is Back in Time. That's how I open every single program. We dance to that song and I yell to them, like when he says like, where are we gonna go? I yell like all the way back, 1863, Vicksburg campaign. And that's something I actually picked up from one of my high school history teachers. He did that. And I remember sitting there being like, this dude, what a nerd. Like, I can't believe he's doing this. And outwardly having to look like I wasn't enjoying it, but inwardly being like, this is so cool. And that history teacher, he did a lot of tactile learning, which is something that I've adopted with my programming here with the kids too. And is that kids learn in all different ways, and really getting them out into the park to do different things and have different experiences, to understand that a national park isn't just for people who love history or love nature. You can find you can find a way to appreciate it no matter what you love, whether it's I do love going on walks, or I love looking and identifying flowers and birds, or one of my biggest things here is art, given that we are the quote unquote art park of the world.
Right.
We are one of the most monumented parks, if not the most monumented park in the National Park Service. So we have a lot of wonderful examples of art. And I love to include a lot of art programming in the work that I do, even if the program isn't completely focused on like art history, it has an art element to it where the kids are creating projects based on what they learned that day, or they're simply sketching what they see out sitting in nature. So really trying to get that connection with these kids that you can find something you enjoy here. You don't just have to love the Civil War and love the story here to really appreciate this public land and your public land.
Yeah, geez, when you mentioned Huey Lewis and Back in Time, and that took me all the way back to my high school days in the 1980s.
Took you back in time?
Sure did. I love the way that you talk about these many different ways you help students connect with place. I'm a huge advocate of the power of place as a way to connect with stories and history and things like that. What's it like for you to have this National Military Park essentially as your office, and how do you connect with that place?
It's, in a word, incredible. Some days I have to pinch myself because I can't believe that this is where I get to work at. So many people have office jobs where they sit in an office, they sit in a cubicle. And I feel so blessed to be able to work in a place as expansive and wonderful and historic as this. I never envisioned myself working for the National Park Service growing up. It was never something that I thought I would do. And I always joked that I wouldn't do it because I don't have a head for hats. I was like, I'm not going to wear the hat. But really, it was just something that I never thought of until I had a professor in my master's program. He was really influential to me in that he is a national park enthusiast and he visits a lot of them. And his name's Dr. John C. Ricker. So Dr. Ricker, if you're listening, you're the reason why I'm here. And he told me one day, have you ever considered working for the National Park Service? To which I gave him my famous hat line. But all jokes aside, I hadn't really thought about it until he told me about it. And I found myself here in Vicksburg and found a pathway student internship, and
Okay.
they liked me well enough. They decided to keep me, and here I am, a park ranger. And um, it in that this is a Civil War park, of course. That's Vicksburg's big story. I'll be the first to admit to everybody watching, Civil War history, not my area of expertise. I do not claim to be a subject matter expert in Civil War history. If you talk to me about what troops were where at what time and who was leading them and which direction they moved, Chris, I'm going to look at you and my face is just going to go blank because you lost me. Because while I understand the importance of, like, they made this assault at this time and this is what happened because of that, it really doesn't click for me why different small movements matter. So when this opportunity came up at Vicksburg, I immediately admitted to everybody. I was like, but I'm not a Civil War historian. Like, I don't know if you want me here. That's not my area of expertise. I'm more Gilded Age history. And they said, but we do want you here because there's so much more to this place than the Civil War story. And you can't have a team built entirely upon subject matter experts, because then what the public wants and what the public can understand gets lost in the details. So I've been very blessed to be that person for them. They're like, hey, Taylor, I'm thinking about doing this and blah, 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 blah. What do you get that? Is that something that you would be interested in? And I'm like, you got to pare it down. But you talk about finding sense of place. And I thought for a long time about how am I going to find my sense of place here at a Civil War park? And I really have in the story of the civilians that were here, the women that were here, and the art, of course, because my background is in art history. And I couldn't believe it when I started working here, how much art surrounded us. And when they found out that art history was my background, it was like, game on.
Yeah.
Take it and run, you can do it. But that's something that I really like to portray to a lot of people who come in. A lot of our visitation is men and women, couples coming in. And a lot of times you hear the wife say, oh, this is his thing. He loves the Civil War. And he's like rattling off. And she's like, he just dragged me along. But I always try to tell them, like, there's so much more here than the cannons and the troop movements. Like, you're going to find a story that you resonate with, because at Vicksburg, the civilian story is such a large part of the story that we tell, because it was a siege and it didn't just affect the troops, it affected real people like you and me. We'd be civilians. And if we had been trapped here in Vicksburg, that would have been our life and our experience. And so you can really find that. Yeah. So I just like helping people find those stories that they can really connect with here outside of the military history of it.
To me, that's one of the hallmarks of a great park ranger, though, is that you invite people to come and find their own way to connect to the story, as opposed to someone's like, here's the story I'm going to give you. And I'm, like, there are a bunch of stories. I'm super excited about helping you find your story. And,
yes,
it seems like you've got a real gift for that.
Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah.
So when you talk about your own career path, you mentioned the Pathways program, and for folks who aren't familiar, that's a program the Park Service has where they give students the opportunity to learn how to be a park ranger and wear the uniform and the flat hat, and then sort of puts them on a career path toward the Park Service. So as you tested out the Park Service as a possible career option, what did you like about it that you decided, like, yeah, this could be for me?
What I liked was that I knew with the Park Service, I was going to get to do exactly what I'd always wanted to do, and that is connect with kids. A large part of my internship was leading the Junior Ranger Summer Camp program that had already been established when I got here, and heading that up. And through that experience, it was a very trying experience because it was much bigger than anything I had ever handled before. But again, the connection that I made with those kids was so wonderful. And I recognized that through this agency, which of course is a transient agency, you bebop around, you see a bunch of different parks. You can get those different experiences and connect with different children, and also work with such a great team. We're all here in this park for a purpose, and that purpose is, of course, the mission of Vicksburg National Military Park and the National Park Service to preserve, protect, and interpret these wonderful public lands, our shared history. And I've made so many amazing, wonderful friends here at this park, some people that I feel really blessed to call my best friends that I've ever had in my entire life. And I think through a lot of those friendships, the experiences that we have together, the ability to be engaged within the community, engaged within the youth population here, and then again, I mean, I get to go to work in a national park every single day. If I want to jet up to the Illinois Monument and sit on the steps to just, think about a program or talk with people, I can do that. I don't have to sit at a computer screen for 8 hours a day. And that is such a blessing to me and so wonderful. And I just love being a part of that.
You mentioned your colleagues, and I'll give a quick shout out to two of them. Andrew Miller, who's done some writing for us at Emerging Civil War,
Yes.
and Emma Murphy Novak, whom I love to death. I've known since her
Yes.
Fredericksburg days.
Yes.
Great folks.
They are. They're wonderful.
As you talk about some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, it brings to mind to me this entire skill set that I think a lot of people forget about, where they almost expect you to be the subject matter expert, but really I think your skill set is like how to educate, how to coordinate, how to do the organizational things, which allow you to help people connect with that history. But it's a whole different skill set than knowing this regiment or that brigade or those sorts of things. I suppose that's why a Tim Smith book is a good reference to have on the shelf. You can look for that. But being able to know how to do the job, it really goes a lot beyond history to me.
Yes, I always say there's a huge difference between being an historian and being a public historian. And that's why there's two different degrees for that anymore. You have a history degree or a public history degree. Now my degree is in history, but its concentration is public history. So that's what a lot of my coursework largely focused on. Because of course you have historians, subject matter experts. We need those because we need that material in order to build our programs on. But public history is really doing history for the public. And it's like I said before, when they bring me their stuff and they're like, Taylor, is anybody going to care about this? And I help them out in like what I'm able to comprehend about everything and where I kind of doze off. And doing history for the public is so different in that you have to make it consumable for all ages, really. I know in the National Park Service, we're consistently told to write at a 5th grade level when you're writing these waysides so that it can be understood by all ages and all educational backgrounds. And it really does take a special skill set to be able to take all of this wonderful knowledge that historians have written about and they've discovered and take that and say, okay, but how do I now present this to the public in a way that they're going to understand? And that's why I love public history. I really do.
I do too, and there's like, I look at it as being a translator, where you're taking a lot of this specialized material and information and translating it into a form that the general public can understand, enjoy, engage with, be inspired by.
I love that. And I always, it reminds me of a quote from The Office. I don't know if you watch that show, where Michael Scott, his accountant, is explaining something to him, and he just stops and looks and he goes, okay, explain this to me like I'm 5. And that's what I always think about when I'm like, going crazy writing things. And this is so wonderful. And it's like, okay, but now let's take it down to brass tacks. And what are the core messages we're trying to get to?
Now, you mentioned that you've had a lifelong interest in history, and your own personal particular interest is Gilded Age history. Was there a particular moment or particular episode or event that really turned the light bulb on for you as far as just history as something that was wonderful to you?
Oh my gosh, everybody, I don't know what they're gonna think when they hear this. it's so cliche. The Titanic, Chris.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No,
When
I totally get it. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a huge believer. I mean, I've written books about it, that pop culture is one of the most important avenues for people to connect with history. So I'm with you 100%.
yes, Chris. That's something that I preach about too. We hear all this stuff about historians being like, oh, that TV show got it wrong and they did it wrong and it didn't happen that way. It's like, that's okay that it didn't happen that way. For me, as long as the story's getting out there and it inspires people to read more about it and to be interested in it, and at least to know that that event happened, I think that that's very, very important, because that's what happens for me a lot. Is I'll see something and I'll wonder, like, did that really happen that way? Or I like a certain aspect of it. And so then you start reading about it, and then eventually you know a larger, more complete story than you got just from that television show. But yes, the Titanic was probably my first love in history. Oh, loved everything about it. The dresses, the disaster,
I
oh
love
my
the
God,
iceberg.
the architect, the architecture of the ship. That was definitely it, and then it just kind of grew from there. I always have found little interests. Another big interest of mine is the Tudor dynasty. So
Okay.
King Henry VIII and his 6 wives. That was one of those moments for me where I'd always heard about it, saw the show, thought this is kind of good, and then you should see my book collection at home,
All right.
Chris. It's yeah, it's pretty expensive.
Yeah. Now, you've also mentioned in our conversation a couple teachers who've been inspirational to you, your high school teacher, your master's teacher. What advice do you have to teachers as they try to help people connect with these stories that you love?
I think it's really important when you're teaching history, to not be dry about it. With our entertainment that we have at our fingertips today, it's very difficult for kids to hone in on just a basic history lecture. I'm going to stand up here. I'm going to tell you all these dates. I'm going to tell you about things that I think you should care about, and then you're going to have a test on it, because you know what they're doing. And I did it all the time in school. I call it the pump and dump.
Yeah, right.
Like, all right, I got to pump all these dates in my head, and then once I dump it out on that test, boom, it's gone. And while the bread and butter of our profession is knowing dates, knowing names, knowing events, timelines, of course, are huge. I think what's most important is the why. Why is it important that we remember this? And getting these kids to understand how it relates to their lives today. And by doing that, you could have some really great conversations. But also, I mentioned before, tactile learning projects. I remember we were learning about, I think it's a dome in Rome. We were learning about how domes were first constructed, and we all had to stand around and hold up this ball and put all of our weight on it in a circle so that we could understand like how all the pieces fit together
Mhm.
and how you could use counterweights against each other to create this structure. And I remember that. I was 15 years old and I still remember that. So when you work with kids, even young kids all the way into teens, it's all about getting them involved in the history. Which is why it's so important to bring students to national parks.
I see what you did there.
Yes. Gotta bring them to the place that they've learned about, and then they get here and they experience it and they realize, wow, this is real. I am really walking in the footsteps of all of these men and women and children who were here before me. And you go to these great houses, and somebody just mentioned it yesterday. Like, wow, I'm at Abraham Lincoln's home and I'm touching the same banister that he touched. And those were always huge moments for me growing up. And I know that they're huge moments for kids today too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of kids, and this ties back into the inspirational thing. You've got two children of your own. What do you feel your obligation is as a mom to your children when it comes to understanding history?
Well, my children are probably my biggest inspiration. Ever since becoming a mom, all I've ever wanted to do is make them proud, and just make them really proud of their mom and this role that I have. And I have two daughters. One of them is 6, almost 7, and one of them is 17 months old. And so the 17-month-old, obviously, she's too young to understand it now. She just knows mommy gets dressed and drops me off at daycare, and then she picks me up and feeds me dinner, and then I go to bed. But my 7-year-old, she really understands what I do. She's been able to come here on some field trips to experience what other kids experience. And she's incredibly proud of the work that I do. She tells everybody that she runs into, my mommy's a park ranger. My mommy's a park ranger. And of course, this is all because a lot of the kids that she goes to school with and goes to her after school programs, they do programs with me. So it's like, oh, that's your mom. But through my work here, she has really gotten interested in history and wondering what I do, why I do what I do, and the stories that we tell. And we'll go walk around the downtown area. And if she sees any sort of wayside, she knows it's going to talk about history, and we stand there and we read it together and we look at the building, and she asks questions. And I hope that I'm inspiring a little future historian, if not I'll be happy if she's an armchair historian. I really will, just so that interest level is there. But I feel very proud to be their mom and to wear this National Park Service uniform, and that they are seeing their mom in a uniform role that makes a positive impact on thousands of people every single day. So
when you first shared that story with me the first time you and I met, I thought it was just such a beautiful story, and I was inspired by it. So that's why I wanted to share your story with a wider audience, because I'm sure other people will be inspired by it too. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
So is there anything about your job or your career that I haven't asked that I should have?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. We kind of hit all the points. We talked about a lot, talked about inspirations. Oh, we could talk about how I got into my job.
Please do.
We talked about the pathways a little bit, but I always love to share my story with everybody. So when I moved to Vicksburg, of course, my husband's active duty military in the United States Coast Guard. So we've bebopped around. I spent a lot of time in the public history field. I worked at a maritime museum up in Marquette, Michigan, which is way up in the Upper Peninsula. And I worked at the Newport Mansions out in Newport, Rhode Island, which many of them are the Vanderbilt mansions. So the Gilded Age history, loved it. But then I had a baby. I had my first daughter. And so I quit that job, did the stay-at-home thing, but really recognized that I needed to always be learning and being in history. So my husband gave me the push that I needed to get my master's degree. So I was earning my master's degree online when he got orders here to Vicksburg, Mississippi. And being a Yankee girl, living in the North pretty much my entire life, I was terrified, let me tell you, to come down to the deep South, to come to Mississippi. It was, I didn't know what the culture was going to be like. I knew it was going to be crazy hot, and I didn't do hot well. And I just didn't know what to expect. And job wise, I thought that there was no way there was going to be any job down here for me. There was no way. We needed to stay in New England, where museums are aplenty up there. And I didn't think that I would find any opportunity down here. So we moved down here, though. I was finishing up my degree and applying to different places and getting rejection after rejection after rejection. I think I got like 11 rejection letters in the public history field down here. And I could not for the life of me understand why. I had 9 years of experience in the public history field. I was obtaining a master's degree. What was wrong? Like, why wasn't I getting jobs? And then, of course, my professor was like, have you thought of the National Park Service? And I don't have it for hats, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, I was on Facebook and I saw that Vicksburg National Military Park posted that they were hiring a pathway student intern.
Okay.
And I saw it and I went, Intern? I'm not going to be an intern. I shouldn't be an intern this far into my career and 9 years in the field, getting a master's degree. I shouldn't have to do this. But then more rejection letters came, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna put in for the internship. This might be my foot in the door. And if I don't get this internship, because I hope I get it, but if I don't get it, I was gonna finish my degree and then go to nursing school because I was like, this field isn't for me, obviously. I can't get a foot in the door. Um, Applied for it, waited. Thankfully, I got the internship, Chris.
Yeah.
And got here, did really good work, I guess, because they liked me enough where I was able to step into a ladder position, a 579 Park Ranger series. And I guess the rest is history.
Well, the park and the local community are better for it since they were smart enough to get you. You know?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it was a lot of hard work to get here, but I'm very happy to be here.
A lot of perseverance there as well.
Yes, yeah.
So in closing, what final advice might you have for a young woman who's interested in getting into the public history field?
It's a lot of hard work, ladies. I will say it's especially hard work when you're getting into the Civil War field. And I commend all of the female Civil War historians for doing what they do, knowing what they know, and breaking into this field. Because a lot of times here you get somebody walks in the door and they see a male ranger and a female ranger, and they're immediately going to go to the male ranger because it's just, it's just a internal bias that I think people have. I don't think it's anything malicious. It's just that obviously this is probably the historian. So it's going to take it's a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, like you said before, but understanding that it can be done, you have to want it hard enough. I don't think I mentioned in my story that while I was doing the internship here, I was completing my master's degree, my final capstone, which I was doing through the park. But I also was taking care of my daughter because my husband was away at the time, because of course with the military, they leave.
Right.
So my days were a lot of come to work for 8-9 hours if you include the lunch break. So work until 5, go home, take care of my daughter, get dinner, get her in bed. And then I was up until like midnight or 2 a.m. working on my coursework to get up at 5 a.m. and do it all over again 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I am not going to lie, there were days where I was like, I cannot do this. I'm never going to make it. I wanted to give up. Oh, I wanted to give up so bad. It was so tempting. Because I was like, I'll just throw in the hat and it's fine. But I did it. And it was not easy. It was difficult, but and I tell this story to the teens that I speak with a lot, and that you can feel like everything is stacked up against you. Every odd is against you in your situation. And quitting would be so much easier than getting through it. But I promise you that if you want it bad enough and you work hard enough, you're gonna make it, and you're gonna make it happen. And just for all the ladies out there, the Park Service is wonderful. We need more female rangers, and it's just, again, such a blessing to work in this field. Whether you like history, whether you like natural resources, cultural resources, law enforcement, we have female law enforcement ranger here. There are so many different career paths in the National Park Service. You don't have to just love history to be a part of the Park Service. So if you're a woman and you're listening, I highly encourage you to consider the National Park Service as your career.
That's fantastic. Now, I have to admit, though, when I said any final advice, I thought maybe you'd say, beware the fire ants, which is also very important advice there in Vicksburg.
Yes, that is very important advice. I have had many a run-in, yes.
So Taylor, I'll close on this now, because as a father of a young woman who was once a little girl and has since grown up and now has a little girl of her own, I always wanted her to be able to see role models so that she knew that she could be whatever she resolved to be, to quote Stonewall Jackson. You're the very kind of role model that I would have wanted her to see when she was young. So I just want to thank you for the work that you do and the inspiration that you give other young women as they look at history as something that they can do too.
Goodness, Chris, those are such kind words. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I've enjoyed the chance to chat with you today. Thanks so much, Taylor. I appreciate it, and good luck to you in your work out there.
Thank you, Chris. Talk with you soon.
Thanks. Thanks for being with us here on the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.